So last week, I participated in a live stream where we were comparing Bricks, the page builder, to the WordPress block editor. The premise of the show is called Bridge Builders, and I think the idea was that we would kind of share ideas, learn from each other and stuff. There wasn't quite as much conversation as I was kind of hoping for, but overall, I feel like I definitely learned a lot. I feel like the hosts did a great job of asking questions, and the chat was super lively. One of the biggest questions I got after the fact was essentially how much work did I do before the live stream that you didn't get to see? Because in our private chat ahead of time, we talked about that setting up fonts and colors and all that stuff is just kind of boring, and we just didn't want to show that part of it. We wanted to show more just a few specific components and how we would lay them out and manage them. So there was some work done on my part beforehand, and I think maybe I didn't make it clear how little the work actually was. So I thought what would be the most useful thing is to see the custom theme that I use to build out projects using full site editing. It's the same thing as using something like underscores or Genesis or understrap or just all these sort of like starter themes that have been, popular in WordPress for a long time. This is just one that myself and Aru Ahmed, another developer, kind of built specifically for what we would call kind of a modern WordPress workflow that has really basic things like a build process to use Sass and a build process to automatically make custom blocks if that's something that you need to do. It does some kind of fancy stuff, but at the end of the day, it's not really doing any of that in the case of this quite so much, because this is a pretty basic just landing page. It really comes in handy when you're doing sort of more complicated stuff. So that said, the theme itself is available on my GitHub. I'll put a link in this video. It's free, it's open source. You can use it. I'm not selling it to you. You can definitely file issues or collaborate on it if you want as well. So let's just talk through the theme framework that I used and what else I did. And before I do that, I will just say that one last thing is I also built out this header. Again, this is all pure Gutenberg. It's very simple. I'll just show you. It's just a group block, a row block, the logo, and a navigation menu. That's it. It's very basic core blocks. It does do this fancy trick of using a spacer block and some of the more advanced techniques such as the fill width mode, which you can use to kind of flex things and make them grow and fill up the space of their parent. But otherwise, there's no custom code for any of this, no custom anything. This was really just playing around with the navigation block to kind of make it feel a little bit more real when you land it on the page. So let's dig into the theme. Okay, so here's the theme that I used. Like I said, I basically pulled it out pretty straightforward for this project, and I only added a couple of things ahead of time. Normally, we would do a lot of the styling and sort of stuff in the theme because it's really important to have a single source of truth so that I can collaborate with another developer and they can make changes to some of the designs and layouts. We can compare changes. We can see what changes went out and roll them back if we need to. We can work on separate features at the same time. So for example, maybe your client wants you to redesign, landing page A, but they also want you to redesign archive template B, and you're doing them both at the same time, but you're not sure which one's going to go live first. How can you work on two things at the same time, show a demo of this, show a demo of that, put this one on a staging site, launch this one, but not launch this one. All that sort of stuff is really why you'll see developers using custom themes to control a lot of the design and the style of their sites. It's really once you get past that initial stage of just like kind of cowboy coding live on their actual website. And if you want to learn more about that, I did a really long live stream with Mark Zemansky, and we talked all about when is a developer ready to start looking at things like version control. And one of the keys is using a custom theme rather than putting everything inside of the page builder. So inside of my custom theme, there's really not much going on. We have a Functions.PHP, which has, some of that basic WordPress setup of theme stuff. If you're using something like Bricks or a page builder, you have all of this too. It's there. It's just, you're probably using, with Elementor, I think they have that hello theme maybe, so that's kind of doing all of that for you. So Functions.PHP. And then, with a block theme, there's really no other top level PHP files. There's no header, footer, all that sort of stuff. Instead, what we do have is theme.json. And this is where I did most of my work. So it starts with the default theme.json that you get from WordPress. So when you start up a new theme, you can get your default theme.json. Now you can actually do all of your design and styling inside the block editor if you want to. I kind of just like working with a JSON. I never thought I would say this. Honestly, I used to complain about this all the time, but I actually really like working with a JSON file. It's popular in things like Tailwind, you use a JSON file to kind of set, for example, my color palette. I can just set the values. I can give them names. It's really clear and easy to see. If I use a AI tool like Copilot, it's really good at identifying stuff. If I put anything wrong because I'm using a code editor and I have this schema link, it'll actually tell me, hey, you're putting this in wrong. So you don't have to even like remember kind of how things work. You can literally just start typing and it'll recommend what are the exact things you're allowed to do. So I find it to be something that I didn't think I would ever like, but I liked. So all I did was the default theme.json from WordPress. I added my custom colors here. I just pulled a few colors out of the style of ghost.org. Now, the way that theme.json works is this is the exact same thing. If I came to the styles and I looked at my colors here, these are the same exact colors that I was just defining. They're showing up here. The difference is I'm not controlling them in here. I could if I want to, and I could design them here, click a button, and have them saved to my theme.json. I just like writing it in there. I don't really like coming in here and dealing with the color pickers. I just like being in code. That's just a personal preference. A lot of this other stuff is default WordPress. And then also you can add your default gradients. So I did add one gradient ahead of time that I wanted to use as a background. That shows up right here. And again, I can add my own gradients and things like that, but like I don't really want to sit here and click through a bunch of stuff. I mean, I think in the live stream you saw that both Kevin and myself really kind of just like writing CSS whenever we can. It's nice to fill out and check some boxes, but the minute you get to something that's a little more complicated, writing CSS is kind of the way to go. And then exactly the same as what Bricks would do or any other page builder, WordPress is going to take these and it's going to turn them into CSS variables, which means that later in the future, if I decide I want to change the primary color, I can change it in this JSON file and it's going to change across my entire site. Now, updating a brand color honestly is not a thing you do that often, but you can, and that is more useful for other things. For example, sometimes you launch the same theme on multiple sites, and on that second site they're using a different color because it's a different side of their business or something like that. So there are use cases for it. The last thing I think I added, all of this is really default WordPress, like spacing and all that sort of stuff. Technically I would come through and I would define all of my spacing sizes. That way, when I use it, it's a design system and I can start with these defaults. And then if they decide, hey, we want these certain CSS variables to be a little bit different, we want it a little tighter, a little looser, you can definitely do all of that by just changing the values here, or again, changing it inside the site editor, which I don't do quite as often. The last thing I did add was some fonts. You know what? I'll take it back. I think they used Enter, which was actually the default font in the theme. But again, this is a thing where I can either add my font here or I can add it manually in my theme.json. The nice thing about doing it through the interface, though, is they do have the nice Google Fonts kind of automatic connection. So you can do that. I think I remember in this case, my starter theme, it's just matches the WordPress design. So it actually had Enter already. And I think that was the font they used because anybody in tech development world is using Enter right now. So that's the only thing I really changed in my theme.json. Honestly, if I was really trying to match the spacing sizes on a lot of this stuff, I would go in and change it there so that it's already ready, but it wouldn't really affect the fact that when I want to add padding or margin, these are just variables. So I can change them now and then I can later go on and say actually I want this to be something else. So that's kind of what's useful there. The way that a WordPress theme works is you generally have maybe some PHP for some extra functionality, like handling, loading your style sheets, registering menus, those sorts of things. So there's some of that. There was nothing that was really mattered for this sort of build because we didn't get that deep into it. If I was adding custom post types, custom fields, maybe I would control a lot of that here rather than using a plugin because again, I can kind of see the changes. I don't have to worry about the changes. I know that the changes will go from my staging development to my live environment without dealing with, I changed it in some plugin here and I have to go change the same plugin. So there's a lot of that. Also, what WordPress will do is it'll flatten a lot of your templates and stuff to these PHP or HTML files, which is really super handy. It's really nice being able to take something that was in the block editor and with a click of a button, get it flattened to show up inside of this HTML, because again, I can see the changes, I can track it, I can know if something's going to change or not. That's super handy. The nice thing about patterns, which I probably won't get into today, but is the fact that they do actually let you use PHP, which is really great for if you want your patterns to be able to use translations, like you want the text inside your patterns to be actually translatable. You're running a site with multiple languages, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of value in that. But again, it's like all this stuff, but this is all just handled by WordPress. I'm not really these days coming in here that often and messing with any of this. That's stuff I actually do in the block editor. And then the last thing, so all of this stuff, again, was really core WordPress blocks. So a core WordPress video block, the core WordPress I did for the background, for the text, for the changing the color. None of this stuff really required anything code-wise. This was just using core WordPress. The grid was entirely core WordPress. There's nothing I really needed to do for any of this stuff. And then I think the one fancy area that we spent a lot of time on is the cards. And so this is an area where I think your job as a developer is to make the smartest choice for your client and yourself, but I do think your client kind of comes first. I know in the live stream we kind of went back and forth a bit on whether you would let clients edit content. There's definitely a situation where clients want to pay you to manage their content. They don't want to touch it. That's definitely a common situation. And then there's other situations where you're building content for your client to manage, for your client to edit. You're going to train them. You're going to train their marketing team or department. That's kind of the goal. And so with a page builder like Bricks, it really only has to lean into that one side of the market, which is technical people need to use this tool. And the block editor, for better or worse, leans into both, which is technical people can use it, but we need it to feel really intuitive for non-technical people. And yes, that's made it a lot harder to build as a piece of software to be able to do, hey, we need all the power and all the simplicity. And I would never say they've gotten it right both, 100% of the time. So the difference here was that in the page builder approach, the idea was to turn this into a custom post type, and I opted not to do this. And I'll just explain briefly why. I think there is a large trend right now in the page builder space to talk about what they call dynamic data, which is really post types and custom fields. Obviously, these are core WordPress features. They're extremely critical. Use them all the time. There's nothing wrong with using custom post types, but using a custom post type adds a lot of overhead to a situation, and you just have to weigh the pros and cons, very successfully. So in the example of the Brick site, this was a custom post type. And so the client who is not allowed to edit any of the content, they don't get to change any of this text here. For some reason, this is a custom post type where they can add additional, I think the term was marketing verticals to their site, which to me is like changing the headline text, but then adding a completely new marketing vertical. I don't see a distinction of why one or the other would be something that you would want to give access to a client, like why one and not the other. But in any case, once you load a custom post type, WordPress does a lot of other things. It adds, routes for it. It adds permalinks for it. It adds, there's additional weight in the database. Every time you load that page, there's these additional queries. There's a lot that goes on, and it's a tool that's for a specific job. I don't really see that being the point of this. And the second reason is that I really, really don't like when we inherit a WordPress website, which we do a lot, take somebody's website from a developer that it wasn't working out for them, and they come to us and we're doing things like cleaning up the performance, a lot of times stripping out the page builder, all that sort of stuff. And you get to these situations where there's some content here and you now have to play Carmen Sandiego and find out where in the maze of custom post types and custom fields you edit the content. And so for the example here, I think the one place where I added custom code was to absolutely position these different images. And the way I chose was to give them 3 curated options when they pick the image using a block style. They can put it on the left, they can put it on the right, or they could put it on the bottom. And the only thing that I would do differently depending on the client's budget is I might give them a tool kind of like this range slider right here. I might give them a tool like that lets them drag it, and then in real time they would see it moving across the screen. Maybe that's something I would do. Or, if I was feeling more excited, I would give them a tool like this, where this is a core WordPress feature. and where you can drag a thing around an image. I might use that and let them drag, a little icon around, and that would move this around. That either one of those would be something I would do, but it would only be if the client was, at a level of budget that I think was, worth that for them. For this is a couple lines of CSS in the theme, and I'll show you how that works. So that's a difference. And the reason why is because in the bricks builder situation, this was where this sat was based on, you had to go to a custom post type. You had to find the matching post. You had to go inside of it. You had to put in arbitrary numbers on some sort of a scale. And then you had to save that, go to the front page of your site, reload the whole, front end of your site, and see if it looks the way you want it to look. And to me, asking a client to jump through that many hoops to pick where an image goes it's just not a great user experience. I just think the idea that they're editing the content they're directly looking at is super important. Now, if there was a ton of content underneath these, like these actually were individual landing pages with all this different stuff, maybe I would consider putting the settings with that page. But just making a custom post type to show some cards on a page, to me, seems like a missed opportunity for what's a really nice visual editing experience directly in the editor. So that's kind of the difference there. And I just want to be clear, custom post types have a ton of purpose and value, and there's plenty of reasons to use them, but I don't think they make sense for, I just need a place for people to edit content. I don't like sending clients to random options pages. How do I edit my header? Well, you kind of go to this options page for that, and then you use the classic menu for that, and then you use the, custom post type that I've picked out over here for that. I just think that that's just not how we should be building WordPress websites. I think a lot of people see that stuff, and that's why they don't like WordPress. And then, contrast that with, where do I edit it? I click edit the page. I come here, I click on the image, and I move it around. It's a simple experience. I think it's getting better. It's getting closer to what we want it to be. So let's talk about how I added these style options right here, because I think that's one piece where I wrote code and I think I showed it, but I don't think I really explained it. So I'm just going to show you how easy it is to do this. So in my theme, I have a source folder where I can build custom blocks, build JavaScript, build CSS. So you don't need a build process for really any of this stuff. I just like having it because I like having everything compile. I like it being performant. I like it being, all one thing, that whether I'm adding blocks or doing all this stuff. So that's why it's like this. You don't really need it, but you can use this theme. There's plenty of examples. So in the custom theme that I'm using, we do have an option for some front-end JavaScript that you can load on the front end, which is something we really do less and less these days, because you can now tie your JavaScript directly to blocks so that it doesn't load site-wide. So even though this theme has like a global JavaScript file, it's hardly ever gets used. And then we have a JavaScript file for just making changes to the block editor. This is, again, something you don't have to do with a build process or heavy JavaScript. And actually, I think you could do all this in PHP. I just kind of prefer it this way because I think it just is a little cleaner. But the idea is all I'm doing is registering some block styles. And I'm saying for the image block, here's some different style options that I want to have. And for the group block, here's some style options I want to have. And for the columns block, here's another style option I want to have. And so once I declare those block styles, they just show up in the block editor here. Right now they're written like this. There's actually some really cool stuff happening where you can just make them as like files in your theme or do them in the block editor. There's some really cool stuff happening. So I just make custom styles for my blocks that the user can come in and they can click and they can do whatever they want to just apply those styles without having to think about a class name or whatever. CSS, I'm controlling it. I get to make the changes globally if I want to. And then under my CSS, so I have a bunch of like stuff for CSS, and the truth is all of this is empty. In really complicated sites, you do get really granular into writing a lot of CSS. And again, like I don't really want the experience of like coming into like here into a little text box and writing some CSS, and then I have to figure out where that CSS lives and I'm trying to track it down. So there is a big style sheet here, but it's actually empty because I'm not using it for anything on this ghost site. All I do have is a folder for my block styles. And the reason that I like doing it here is a number of things. One, I can use Sass and use like things like mix-ins and breakpoints and stuff. That's really handy. I like to have the power of using a little bit. I think one day we're going to get to a place where modern CSS eliminates most of this, but for now I like being able to pull in like breakpoints and things like that. The second thing is that as you get further along with making separate CSS for each block, WordPress is really smart about not loading that CSS unless it's used on the page. So it's really handy to write your CSS so that it's scoped to a specific block. And if that block isn't there, the CSS is not loaded and it's not causing performance issues. And so that's kind of that real value of WordPress that I think a lot of people are just now tuning into. Like, hey, you can scope your styles and your JavaScript to these granular levels. Then I don't have to get this like huge plugin that does all the work of, generating all this stuff and pay for some subscription or whatever. WordPress is actually just offering a lot of that out of the box now. For these block styles that I wrote some styles that are just for images and I gave them as options here. And then under my image file, I wrote the CSS for it. And now, my client has a page that's just a blog post or like a privacy policy page and there's no images at all on the page, the CSS does not load. If there's an image on the page, the CSS loads and it handles the styling for those different styles that I set up for like absolute positioning, that inner image. To totally recap, what did I do beforehand? I wrote the CSS for those positioned images. I added it here to my block styles so that they would show up in the block editor. And I added some colors and font, or no, I didn't do the font. I just added the colors to the theme.json so that there was colors. So at the end of the day, the theme is not really super important. I could have done it with 2024 and done it through the block editor, but like that's not a real use case that I would ever do on a client site. So I didn't want to present that use case. That's definitely a really good use case for people when you're just spinning up a site. Like my personal blog, I adapted, a theme. But in the case of a client that came to me, I would start with this bare bones, very minimal theme that just gives me no, opinionated design, no pattern libraries, no a million different CSS frameworks loaded in, icon font. There's no icon font libraries being loaded. There's none of that stuff. This is just pure WordPress that's going to make some HTML, some really lean CSS, and it's going to make an editing experience that to me is just so nice that I can just point and click and edit some content and it looks exactly like it's going to look like in the final end. And from what we've seen, clients who get this are generally pretty stoked when they see that editing their website is this easy. So that's my kind of walkthrough of what work did I actually do ahead of time. I just want to end by thanking Matt and Mark and Kevin for what I thought was a really interesting live stream. I think that at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with any one person's approach. And I think it's just about understanding that there are different markets that need different tools, that need to use different workflows, because there's just different expectations from clients, different budgets, different hosting platforms that have their own requirements, different security, different performance needs, all these sorts of things, because WordPress is this massively wide ecosystem. And what works for one project is not always going to be what works for another project. And the minute you start growing and wanting to collaborate with other developers or manage a team of developers or institute real quality control and security, and I mean, I didn't even get into things that like, there could be unit tests. There's a whole other world beyond just, the difference between maybe installing some plugins and configuring them versus clients who need you to write custom plugins and manage that across, hundreds of sites or something. So there's a big world of WordPress, and you just got to find the workflow that you really enjoy and that works for you and that you have the most fun and that actually meets your clients' needs and makes them and you as successful as possible. If you have any questions about this, definitely put them in the comments below. If you have any questions about how to learn more of these sort of development skills, definitely put it in the comments. The starter theme that I use for this is free on my GitHub. You can definitely try it out. It's just a very clean, simple, empty WordPress full site editing theme that happens to have a WordPress scripts build process in case you want to do things like custom blocks or really modify the editor or really do advanced stuff like that. So let me know if you have any questions, and thank you to everyone who participated and watched the live stream last week.